45 minutes that lasted way longer than that because of all of the unique components that went into managing the Big Darby, all the way from the 2006 creation of the Accord up until today, when pressures and changes to the ecology of the Big Darby certainly have changed, bringing more people together to determine how we're going to move forward together. So today, I encourage you to be listeners. I encourage you to think about storytelling and the importance of learning about the ecological significance of the Big Darby, and hear from the speakers about how they've been working together over many years, the course of multiple decades, to collectively manage such a critical watershed. I do want to welcome our online audience. We have a couple dozen folks joining from across Ohio in different watersheds. We hope that lessons learned from the Big Darby can create implications and lessons learned for folks who are managing other components of Ohio's environment. On your tables, you'll find a brochure with information about all the speakers. You're not going to hear introductions about each of them, so go ahead and reference your brochures throughout the day to learn a little bit more about who you're hearing from. And thanks to those of you who are here in person. There are many of you, including over 80 students from my environmental policy class. Thanks for being here and learning about local environmental policy making. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our annual sponsors. We couldn't do this without them. You have the Sustainability Institute at OSU, Ohio State Energy Partners, and ENGIE North America. We have the ODNR Division of Wildlife. Many of them are here today, so thanks for being here. OSU Facilities Operation Development Department, as well as Edward Jones. Chris Elwood is here from Edward Jones, Delco Water Company, and WAMO, the Water Management Association of Ohio. So let's thank all of our sponsors whose funding makes it possible for students to attend these programs for free. All right, so that's enough from me. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's actually our moderator. Her name is Kristy Meyer, and she's the CEO and founder of Upriver Consulting.
Good morning. It's an honor to be with you here today. Again, my name's Kristy Meyer, and I started Upriver Consulting to help environmentally mission-driven organizations clarify and create and execute strategic campaigns. But as we heard, you can learn all about the speakers and the pamphlet on the table, but we did have a latecomer, so I just wanted to recognize the Honorable Hilliard City Council member, Cynthia Vermillion. Thank you for being here today. So we're here to talk about one of the most biologically diverse watersheds in the Midwest, the Big Darby, home to over 100 fish species, 45 mussels, some of which are state and federally listed. It is a national scenic recreational river, a state scenic river, an outstanding state water, and a last great place. Protecting this watershed safeguards rare habitats, improves water quality, reduces flooding and erosion, and strengthens resiliency to climate change, preserving some of the most rare ecosystems, actually rare ecosystems unlike any other in Ohio. And over 20 years ago, local governmental and community leaders recognized the vulnerability and the value of the Darby, and they came together, as we heard, to form the Darby Accord in 2006. This is a landmark commitment to protecting this extraordinary watershed while allowing for sustainable development. But as we're going to hear, the vision hasn't been really fully realized. And we have a great opportunity before us to achieve those goals of protecting the Darby and its tributaries while putting restrictions on development based on science, as well as creating a conservation network preserving over the half of the watershed in Franklin County. Balancing the economic and social and ecological needs is really complex in this watershed, but they don't have to be at odds. This means, and this is going to take us all coming together, local governments, stakeholders, community members, sitting at the table, all working towards the same end goal, because together we can achieve the original vision. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Anthony Sasson from Darby Creek Association, to tell us more. Thank you for being here.
All right, well, thank you, Kristy. Well, I'm here to give you an idea of why Big Darby is significant or important, outstanding, those types of things. But the first thing I wanted to do was make sure that you got the background on what OSU's role, what the university's role has been in making Big Darby significant. And the first thing we have a problem with, of course, is, there we go. I'll just use a computer. All right. Something's not working right quite. We'll see if I can get this to work. In any case, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the background from the university. Dr. Milton Troutman, he was a legend among fish biologists in the Midwest and maybe across the country. His book, The Fishes of Ohio, published in 1957, this review says the most complete regional treatise in the history of North American ichthyology, or the study of fish. He collected across the state of Ohio, every county, almost all the named streams, thousands and thousands of sites and specimens at the OSU Museum of Biological Diversity over on Kinnear Road. He had a site in Pickaway County now called Troutman's Riffle where he found about 80 species of fish just in one site. Dr. Stansberry was the curator of the Museum of Biological Diversity for mollusks, for mussels. Freshwater mussels are really important in Big Darby. He also collected across Ohio and across much of the eastern U.S. A huge collection of Big Darby Creek mussels are in the collection at the museum from Dr. Stansberry, going all the way back for several decades. Dr. Waters followed Stansberry. He did 3 surveys of Big Darby Creek for freshwater mussels and was a really good proponent of Big Darby and its diversity. Carol Stein was important in opposing a couple of dams that were proposed on Big Darby Creek itself back in the 1960s and 70s. Those were proposed by the Army Corps of Engineers in the city of Columbus. Her work was important also in addition to Stansberry for establishing Big Darby's diversity. But here's a great quote from her: "Damming the creek would be a short-sighted, utterly stupid solution." And I'm sure she got a call from the university president not long after that. But so here's a few pictures of what the Big Darby actually looks like. Here it is in Prairie Oaks Metro Park, almost directly west of here. Here it is down in southwest Franklin County, Battelle Darby Metro Park, one of the largest metro parks in the state of Ohio, thanks to their work going back 50 years or more. 1.5 million visitors or so every year. Here's Little Darby Creek out in Madison County. There's some ODNR land in this photo, but most of this is still private land. Here it is down from a different perspective. Here's a stream that you might look at and think it was Little Darby Creek or Big Darby, but it's Hell Branch Run. This is a stream that receives the stormwater from the Big Darby Accord area in western Franklin County. This is down in southern Franklin County, down toward I-71, but it is a high-quality stream in its lower part. The upper part does not look like this at all, and a lot of people have never even seen this lower part. Here's Big Darby, upstream from the Accord area in Plain City. This is quite a different situation where they're building right along Big Darby Creek itself. And that, by the way, that was 2024, recently. A couple of maps of the watershed. You can see from the OSU emblem here where we are right now, and if you go due west, There's a Big Darby Creek watershed about 10, 12 miles away. It goes from Logan County up near Bell Fountain down to Circleville in Pickaway County, about 80-some miles, about 557 square miles. And on the right, you'll see the sampling sites that were monitored by Ohio EPA back in 2014, about 100 sites. And I know we have at least one or two of the people that actually worked on that here today. So what are the outstanding features of Big Darby? Kristy mentioned a couple. Here they are: National and State Scenic River in 1984 and 1994. Outstanding state waters under the Clean Water Act. That's the highest for what they call the anti-degradation policy, which sort of implies that you're not supposed to lower the quality of Big Darby or its tributaries. Exceptional warm water habitat, which is important for establishing things like permits. Top scoring streams for fish diversity in Ohio, and I'll show you a slide on that later. 39 rare species recorded in the watershed. 25 of those are rare mussels, freshwater mussels. I'll show you some of those. 14 are rare fish, and about 14,000 acres acquired as conservation land or parkland. That's through 2 or 3 years ago. It's grown since then, but the important thing here is that this effort started a long time ago, and over 50 years ago, and has continued to the present. One species of fish declared extinct, that was Troutman's Scioto madtom. It's the only central Ohio stream without a major dam. The Scioto, the Olentangy, the Big Walnut Creek, Alum Creek all have major dams on them. The Big Darby did not get one. I've already mentioned that opposition to the dams on Big Darby. One of America's most endangered rivers twice, and that was because related to the development issue. The conservation organization American Rivers declared it most endangered twice, back in 2004 before the accord was started, and then again in 2019. Here's some of those fish. The one in the middle on the top is a spotted darter, one of the more rare fish in the state. To its right, the Tippecanoe darter, also very rare. On the left at the top is blue breast, has become more common throughout the state, spreading from Big Darby's watershed. On the lower left is the variegated darter, which is actually relatively common in Big Darby, but not so much in the rest of Ohio. Red horses in the middle, they're actually a good indicator of quality, and then another darter on the lower right, and at the bottom right is Troutman's Scioto madtom, declared extinct. This is the scoring for Big Darby compared to all the other watersheds in Ohio. Green is good. So the ones that are green on this, and I know this print's pretty small, are Big Darby watershed monitoring events, monitoring years. You notice that the ones toward the top are all green. Those are Big and Little Darby Creeks. So this is the quantification of the quality across Ohio, across the years, and compared to the other watersheds monitored in the state. Here it is looking at it in a different way. The Big Darby watershed has some of the highest scores ever recorded in the state. And you can see the Big Darby is at the top of this graph. Even watersheds that have larger areas have fewer of the highest scores possible for fish diversity. So this is so the high scores are especially true for Big Darby Creek. Big Darby actually has more of these recorded than by far than any other stream, any other watershed in Ohio. Now the mussels. The mussels are one of the iconic features of Big Darby Creek. In the middle on the top are the club shell and the northern riffle shell. These are two federally endangered species that have been for decades the outstanding species that made Big Darby important for freshwater mussel richness. It has, depending on how you count them, 6 to 8 federally listed species, at least a couple proposed. We can count those until recently. The issues here are, these are declining. We need to save these guys to maintain the integrity of Big Darby Creek and its tributaries. The other species shown on this are more common, less rare, but there's still some rare ones here, like the rayed bean on the top right, the snuffbox on the top left, rabbit's foot in the middle row, down to a couple of common ones on the bottom. So we need to keep all those, but especially we're concerned about losing these rare species. The club shell and northern riffle shell are the last places really you could find those species in the state of Ohio. Milestones. Talked about Milton Troutman, that's going back 100 years. Stansbury starts over 50 years ago, 60 years ago. 2 dams proposed in the 1960s, lasting into the 70s from the Army Corps of Engineers in the city of Columbus. Fortunately, there was enough opposition to those, and I'll say the good sense to not construct those on Big Darby. 1979, the first Ohio EPA survey of the watershed. 84, the state designation as a scenic river, and the Scenic Rivers program is going to talk here in a few minutes. 1994, national designation. 2002, the Central Scioto Plan update, which was the predecessor to part of the Accord, established some of the state criteria, or at least brought them up as the components that needed to be addressed. We'll put it that way. 2006, Big Darby Accord, which of course is why we're here today. The 208 plan and water quality management plan are part of the Clean Water Act, as well as the stormwater permit that Ohio EPA established. 2024, the amendment was proposed to the Accord. 25, the mussel survey for Hell Branch Run. I'll talk about that in a minute. And, okay. The next point I wanted to bring up is some of the praise going back a long time for Big Darby Creek. The rare species, the quality of the scenic river have been a constant tone for how people covered Big Darby throughout the decades. ODNR director, one of the finest streams in the state in 1974. Tom Waters from OSU, nearly unmatched for fish and mussel diversity. Ohio EPA in 2004, without sufficient action and precautions, we may forever change the essential character of these streams. Here's what one of those reservoirs looks like. This is I-70 going through at the bottom of this artist's rendition here. And you can see the reservoir right there. If it was ever built, you could see it. You could see it today driving by on I-70, but it went most of the way up to Plain City. A lot of newspaper coverage during those days, hundreds and hundreds of articles on this and other related issues. Here's one from 1967, a map out of a news article for a private sewer district, which was, I'll call it the predecessor, the pre-Big Darby Accord, covering the same area practically. A big wastewater plant, which would have discharged directly to the Big Darby. Probably would have been the last straw, I'd say. A lot of news articles. This is before TikTok. The coverage was almost daily in some cases, sometimes multiple, sometimes more than one article in a day, I've found. A court case against the Scenic River law, etc. Present threats, others, I'm sure we'll talk more about this. Here's the Big Darby, before I go on, this is the edge of the watershed in 1996, and that farm is gone now, it's been developed. Here's a map as Columbus progresses through the years and expands. On the left side of each of these maps, the west side of the county is the Big Darby Watershed, and that defined the shape of the city of Columbus expansion over the years. Also in the 1990s, this Google Earth image captures what was happening, sort of a line in the sand. When people saw this, some things happened that were predecessors to the Accord. This drew enough people's attention to get the city of Columbus's attention and others to lead to the Big Darby Accord. Here is a photo of one of the tributaries of Hell Branch Run upstream in the city of Hilliard in 2001. This also got people's attention. That is pollution in that tributary. And here's Hell Branch Run further downstream. But I wanted to close with making this key point. I talked about the importance of the freshwater mussels in the Big Darby Watershed, the importance of the rare species. Dr. Hogarth from Otterbein College, retired now, just retired, has completed a survey of mussels in Hell Branch Run, and he'll finish the rest of the Big Darby Watershed next year. What he's saying is that he did not find any live mussels in his survey in Hell Branch Run when there should have been over 10 mussels there if those would have survived whatever people have sent downstream to them. No live mussels. What he's saying is we have failed to protect the mussel communities of Hell Branch Run. That's important. We need to collaborate. Let's talk about the theme of collaboration. We need to collaborate to stop this problem, to reverse it, to do better, to save the iconic species of Hell Branch Run, the rare species that are out there. Otherwise, Big Darby won't be the same, and that's what we need to do. That's where the collaboration is really needed to make sure we don't lose any more. So with that, John Tetzloff is going to take over here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, I'm going to pick up the story around 2000 or so and try to give a very short history of the Big Darby Accord. I could talk all morning about this, so this is going to be pretty rushed. If you're curious about anything, talk to me afterwards or look me up. We'll get a cup of coffee and talk more about it. But it was an interesting time where the community was trying to get its act together to protect the creek, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ups and downs of that. Okay. Okay. Yep, we're going to go manual. This is a very bad version of the image that Anthony just showed, but this was actually a pretty impactful image that came out of the Columbus Dispatch showing urban development starting to encroach into the watershed. And for years that had not happened, but by the 1990s that became a big issue. So by around this period, the Ohio EPA was starting to get more pointed and bringing to people, the community's attention that, hey, we are at a crossroads here. And this was a very influential paper that they put out in 2004, basically saying, you know, we're at a tipping point here. You guys have got to do something or we're going to lose this stream. Some other things Anthony mentioned in 2004, the national group American Rivers named Darby to its annual top 10 most endangered rivers list. And I think that really helped to wake people up to the issue, the problem that was pending. So what was happening locally? By the late 1990s, the Dispatch, Columbus Dispatch, was really starting to carry a lot of articles on this issue. Anthony mentioned that during the dam time, they were coming out almost every day. It wasn't quite that fast-paced, but you were starting to see a lot of information in the Dispatch. They even published a complete section on the dispatch in the mid-90s on Darby that had a real expose of what was going on, raising people's awareness. So by the 1990s, Columbus created something called the Environmental Conservation District. And the idea of that was, let's add some protections to the Darby Watershed. But it lacked teeth, and development was pretty much continuing unabated at that point. By the early 2000s, my group, the Darby Creek Association, asked all jurisdictions to pledge that they would protect the creek and work together on planning. So that was the germination of the idea of multi-jurisdictional planning was starting to get out there. Columbus, to its credit, actually proposed to require 40% open space in all new developments in the watershed, but unfortunately, they backed down from that due to development pressure or pressure from the building industry. That became a theme during this whole period, environmental pressure, building pressure. Historically, Columbus has always been heavily influenced by the development industry, and that was certainly true during this period. So by 2002, things were starting to come to a head. There was a group called Progress with Economic and Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, that started to collect signatures to put a ballot initiative on the Columbus election. And they collected enough signatures, got them certified, and by 2002, they were ready to submit them at City Hall. And under threat of that petition, Columbus agreed to come to the table. They put a moratorium on development for 2 years. At that time, it's kind of notable to me that Council President Habash called environmentalists folks who want to stop growth and hurt Columbus. So there was still some tension in the air. Moving forward, one of the interesting things happened that a couple months after Columbus put a moratorium on, Ohio EPA also put a moratorium on, and I think what happened there, I can't prove it, was there were some backroom conversations like, okay, if Columbus is not able to development, let's stop everybody from developing. So everybody would be forced to come to the table to plan. And to their credit, Ohio EPA stepped up and did that, put a moratorium on all jurisdictions until planning could be completed. 2003, Ohio EPA created a much forgotten group called the External Advisory Group, which was made up of jurisdictions, stakeholders, so environmentalists were there at the table, the building industry was there at the table, and this is where a lot of the work really was done to start to map out what would later become the Accord. After much rancor, and that's a whole nother story. Those meetings were very contentious. There was yelling. There were accusations flying. But after a few meetings, and I think this is an important lesson, having everybody at the table gradually started to get people talking to each other. It's hard to sit across from somebody and just be selfish, be self-interested. You're just drawn into the process of trying to come up with a plan. And believe it or not, that's what happened. Columbus made a major concession. They offered to end their annexation policy. This was a famous policy back in the 70s and 80s that they would not allow annexation without extension of sewer and water, or they would not extend sewer and water without annexation. They agreed to waive that. And even the Building Industry Association eventually signed off on the recommendations of this group. Unfortunately, things are not at that point today, and we'll hear more about that a little bit later. So we've got some work to do today. But back then, the group did come up with some consensus recommendations, and those were put into actual EPA regulations that exist to this day. So it was a very productive group. However, the jurisdictions realized that just having some recommended protections wasn't enough. They needed to come together and agree on a plan of where development was going to happen, what it was going to look like, how fast it was going to happen, and most importantly, how much of it was going to happen. So the jurisdictions got together under no pressure really from anybody else and agreed that they were going to undertake a separate planning process to come up with a land use plan, an agreement among all the parties about where development was going to happen. So they hired a consultant. The plan that emerged would become known as the Darby Accord. So the plan detailed additional protections and many other details that Chris Hermann is going to talk about next, so I'm not going to go into all the details. I'm just going to hit on one point here that it was really based on science. So one of the stipulations of the plan was that it had to be able to be shown by science that it could actually work. It could actually protect all these species that Anthony was talking about. So key elements of the Accord, I'm going to go through this quickly because, like I said, I think Chris is going to talk more about this. But set aside 25,000 acres of natural open space, at least as a goal. Set a cap on new development. 20,000 units was the maximum amount of development that could happen in the area. These are out of order. They used scientific modeling to test whether the plan could work, and that's a key. That's going to be proved to be a key part of our our conversation after I get done, is updates to water quality monitoring or modeling. They also would have ongoing water quality monitoring to assess the success of the plan. They proposed an adaptive management process, so if the plan was not working, they would change the plan in response to what was going on in the creek. And again, Chris is going to talk a lot more about this, but I just wanted to show this is the land use map that they came up with. Up in the upper right part, the orange and reds, that's where development was going to go. You also see in the center, there's a pink area that was something called the town center. The idea behind that was, let's take all this development and concentrate it in one area, and by doing that, we will reduce the impact of that development. So did the plan work? Well, almost all the development in the expansion areas were built, with the exception of the town center, which was not built. That ran into some complications. Minimal BMPs were used in the development. So one of the parts of the plan that ended up not being incredibly successful, where there were a lot of great suggestions in the plan about how to do development, how to treat stormwater on the property, but unfortunately the plan didn't have mechanisms to make those mandatory. As a result, a lot of times minimal measures were taken on the developments themselves. Very little of the open space was acquired except for open space within developments. Developments were required to have 50% open space. So every time a development happened, that open space was created. But that 25,000 acres, that bigger picture goal really wasn't achieved. And very little revenue was generated to purchase open space. No water quality monitoring was done, strangely. And the plan to use adaptive management to update the plan wasn't followed. On the positive side, the overall cap on development still holds, with the exception of one development in Hilliard, sorry, Cynthia, which did exceed their cap, but that's getting into the weeds. And then, as Anthony mentioned, freshwater mussels in the Hell Branch Run have disappeared, according to a recent survey. And I'll add to that, they've also disappeared in Big Darby downstream from the Hell Branch mouth, so that's a concern that we're starting to see impacts in Big Darby itself. So, in sum, the Darby Accord is really a unique thing in this country. We are not aware of another plan like it. Something similar was tried in Georgia, but it kind of petered out. But the effort to preserve a very high-quality stream in proximity to a major metropolitan area has never been done. So it's a great achievement. Took a lot of cooperation and public support to get it in place in 2006, and it's going to take a lot of cooperation and public support in 2026 to update the plan. And then just from the environmental standpoint, from the environmental group, we have a coalition that's made up of the Nature Conservancy, the Darby Creek Association, and the Ohio Environmental Council that is working on recommendations for the new accord. So what we're proposing as things that we think are central to the new plan, we need to use the latest science to determine thresholds for individual thresholds. Science has advanced a lot in 20 years, and you're going to hear about this more from ODNR in a minute. We think that science needs to be used to create the plan. We believe staff must be hired to implement the plan. One of the things that we think caused all those elements of the plan to not happen was there wasn't really staff hired to make sure and oversee that everything was happening. What happens when you have a plan like this with 10 jurisdictions, there's a lot of turnover of staff. You start to lose the institutional knowledge that went into creating the plan. So 20 years later, a lot of people in these jurisdictions, a lot of officials and even elected officials don't remember what was in the plan. So hiring staff, we think, could combat that tendency. And then finally, we think that conservation open space has to be directly tied to new development, and both must proceed in tandem. So if there's new development, we can't have what happened the first time where the development's happening but the open space isn't really happening. They both have to happen together. So last word I'm going to say is we really need to keep the accord together, that 10 jurisdictions coming together and negotiating and agreeing on a plan, we need to keep that together, because if everybody goes their own way, there's no way we're going to protect this creek. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Hermann.
All right, good morning, everyone. I am going to talk about the Accord. I guess, my name is Chris Hermann. I work for a firm called MKSK. My involvement in the Big Darby started in 2004 when that consultant was hired to work on the multi-jurisdictional accord and add more details. And my firm was a sub-consultant to a larger firm called EDA that worked with all those jurisdictions to put the original accord together. And now that there's discussion about amending that accord, I and my firm have been hired to help the jurisdictions have those conversations. Okay, so recap. The watershed, I heard Anthony say 557, so yeah, so I keep saying 555, but somewhere in there. Square mile, so it's very large. The accord is the Franklin County portion, so that's outlined in black. So that's 83 miles, 10 jurisdictions, 83 square miles. I guess one of the issues all of us are worried about is what we're talking about is just affecting the area in Franklin County. And ODNR, OEPA are worried about all the advocate groups are worried about the entire watershed. So one of the issues is we got to think about the whole watershed. And I think Anthony, John, a number of us in this room, our hope when the 06 Accord was done was not only that it was going to be successful, but that it would be expanded beyond, and that we show its success and pull other jurisdictions in and be able to protect more of this Accord area. But we're not there, and we need to work on that. And I guess the other point I do want to make, I'm going to be talking about the counterbalance here, and I don't want to come across as the bad guy. That's not how I feel, but there is things we have to balance. But I do want to say, if it wasn't for the work of the Anthony Sassons and the John Tetzloffs of the world and many others in this room, we wouldn't even have this conversation. It would already have been too late. So the advocacy has been critically important to where we are today. And things happen because, well, the best things are most successful when the communities get behind things. So continue to talk about this, continue to say the importance, continue to work with communities, elected officials, helps everybody have the focus to look at solutions to these things. And so I do want to acknowledge the people who have worked on this for so long and continue to work on this, because it's a lot of time and effort. The mission statement, this is what was agreed to in 2006. A lot of words here. But one of the things, and this is where reality, we have to work with reality, right? How do you balance protection? How do you achieve protection? And so this is balancing development with protection. And that was really what the Accord was about, is how do you have development and growth that actually does not damage the environment and helps generate revenues that can help protect the most sensitive areas. But there are a lot of things in here. There are things like, look, we need to acknowledge a full spectrum of housing. We need to be talking about community facilities and needs for any development that happens. How do we incorporate all that into the Accord? So the Accord on the foundation was a detailed analysis of all the geography in the Accord area and analyzed it for environmental sensitivity and impacts to the water quality. And 3 tiers were created, and that was really used as a foundation. So there's kind of this areas like, hey, we really don't want any development to happen here. This area, we really want to try to protect to the extent we can. This area, if development happened, we'd be okay with it. Doesn't mean it's great, but it means we'd rather have it there than the other 2 places. And then, and this is, I really want to emphasize this part. Our situation is, and Anthony showed you that great picture of the bend and the Darby. All those little black lines, I mean, well, actually they're not showing up here, but all the land out here, all the land in the Accord is privately owned, except for the parks, the schools, the public facilities. So we have a situation where people own the land. And in the United States, property owners have rights. And so it is not possible for a public group to basically take that private land without compensation. What do I mean by that? You can't just suddenly say, your ground is a protected park that can never be developed on. We can say that as a jurisdiction or as a state, but we have to compensate the property owner for the value of that land. And if we said, I mean, I'd be fine with it. If we said, hey, we're going to have the whole Darby become a refuge, and we should probably talk about that in our Q&A, we could do that, but we'd have to pay the cost of every piece of land that we get. And that cost would be staggering. I mean, more than staggering. So how do we advance the environmental goals while acknowledging that there's private property ownership rights that we have to respect? And anybody wants to look up in legal terms, it's called a taking. There's all sorts of law case law that's been established all the way to the Supreme Court about takings. And so you can't condemn land for a public purpose without compensation. So that's the situation we have to balance. We have to balance, how do you protect, how do you recognize private property rights? And if we can't figure that out, everything fails. None of us gets even what we want. So one of the foundation pieces, the discussion that happened in the Accord in 2005, was how many new units do we expect to have in the Accord area? What kind of limit do we put on it? And so it wasn't a modeled limit. You can imagine a group was saying, we want 0 new development in this area. And you can imagine the developers and some of the property owners saying, we want as much as we can possibly fit. So you've got the 2 polar ends, right? This is a thing that there's a lot of hand twisting about, arm wrestling. The best that we could come up with was, all right, let's acknowledge the legal development rights that existed at that time, which was the zoning rights, the vested zoning rights in properties. Everything out here was zoned. The zoning, which is a legal right, said how much development could happen. So we said, all right, if everything developed under the existing zoning, not counting the stuff that's already been developed, what do you get? And it was about 20,000 units So that became the magic number, 20,000. So we're going to try to figure out, all right, if we're going to allow 20,000 units to happen in this area, where's the least impactful areas we can put those units? And how do we generate revenue from that development to pay other people for the value of their property and put it under public control and ownership to protect the watershed? That was really what this is about. So, took the environmental sensitivity map, took the land uses in places where we thought maybe development could happen with less impact, and came up with a future land use plan, which is a general land use map to guide future development. Key foundations, John did a great job. So we're trying to identify, protect environmental sensitive lands. That was about 25,000 acres. We agreed to this 20,000 housing units. If development happens, 50% has to be set aside for open space. So we got past that Columbus issue with the 40% and got up to 50. New development needs to build with best management practices. John already talked about that. That has been, there are best management practices that got adopted after that 2000 state discussion and legislation, and communities passed improved stormwater regulations. There's supposed to be a higher level that happens in the Darby. It has been uneven. Better stuff can be done. We got to get back to that. Revenues were to be generated from all that development that were being used to buy land. Unfortunately, the revenue model, which really didn't get approved by some of the jurisdictions until 2008, was heavily reliant on additional fees on top of the normal fees per unit charge for anything that got developed, and then something called tax increment financing, something called new community authorities, but all that puts additional property taxes on. And as you can imagine, groups like the county and the townships that are reliant on property tax were not excited about adding more to those property taxes. So that revenue generation did not happen anywhere really to the level that was really anticipated in the accord. At the same time, land values kept going up, so the money that did get generated doesn't buy as much. So one of the underpinnings of this was we were going to do water quality monitoring and doing it at an amazing level so we could see how development happens, adjust things, figure out what works, what doesn't, make sure that we're not impacting the water quality with this new development. That's probably one of the biggest failures. That did not happen. The state continued to monitor. I think their budgets have gotten tighter as well, but the Accord was supposed to be monitoring this stuff, and that didn't occur. So now here we are 20 years later, and we're saying, well, how was did the BMPs work? Do we make things better with this development? Was it worse? Is it substantially worse? We really can't answer that question the way we need to. And then there's continued multi-jurisdiction cooperation that has happened in the sense of there's a review panel that sees everything before it goes to the jurisdiction for final approval. That's good. John and I were talking before. I think one of the things that I have learned in my professional career that no one told me when I was in school is that things with a long range, the people involved change over time. Makes sense, right? And so that knowledge, that institutional memory gradually fades away. And unless we keep on it and have, people that are really, and we have some in here in this room, that really understand everything and continue to talk about it, you end up having Groundhog Day. And this is happening a little bit with Accord. This has happened with a lot of projects I've been involved with over a long period of time. So that's a key thing we have to remember is just when we say, all right, we made it through the Accord, we had 2 years of, or in this case, from 2000s, 1990s on, we finally got an Accord, thank God, now we can worry about our lives and other things. The answer is no, we can't. Now if we want it to work, we got to keep on it. Accomplishments. It has accomplished things. And we do have the jurisdictions at the table saying this is important. And that's because of all of you and others. Secured about 3,500 acres of open space. Again, interestingly, because we didn't have the revenues and the cost of land, we really haven't purchased those sensitive areas nearly as much as we've gotten the land as part of development. So we're getting the 50% set aside from development is one of the key ways we're getting land at this point in time. 6,000 of those 20,000 housing units have been built. We've had stream and wetland restoration, which is fantastic. That's a map there showing areas in the shaded orange where we're having some improvements. We have the new BMPs. That's good. Let's make sure we get them done. And there have been revenues raised for the Accord. This is an example of stream restoration. So one thing that's happened, and it's not just development, this is agriculture, right? Most of this area is farmed, and in order for the farmers to get the most yield out of ground, they get rid of the stream channels and they turn them into ditches and they push them to the side or make them work best so that they get square areas to farm. So when we go back, restoring those stream channels is a big impact, big positive impact, improvement. So it's an example of good stuff. So things that have changed since the plan, we've got better modeling. Town center didn't happen, so what happens to the units that we talked about that would be in the town center? We talked about conservation subdivision development on package plants. We thought that the technology was going to improve, that we'd be able to do more stuff that wasn't on that central water and sewer. The reality is cost of treatment have gotten so high that you pretty much have to do it on sanitary sewer. And Columbus is the game in town. We got to figure out how to get the revenue generated. We got to figure out how to do water quality monitoring. So why are we talking about amending it now? It's now been 20 years. The Accord talked about, hey, we got to revisit this on a regular basis. We got to have adaptive management. That stuff really hasn't happened, so it's time. Got changes. We've got intended goals. The other thing is affordable housing is a big deal. Just adding housing to our region is a big deal. How do we do that? That's become a key point, particularly for, well, it should be for all the region, but it's also particularly important for Franklin County and Columbus. Columbus has basically got applications for thousands of units that they are holding off at this point in time in anticipation of getting this Accord approved. And so we're doing a process to amend the Accord. We can talk about it in the Q&A. We are to the point now where we almost have a draft plan ready to share with the public. And it really is following some of the same ideas. It's taking our better information on what's sensitive ground and then looking at where can we connect to actual central sewer to make that work. And how do we allocate the remainder of that 20,000 units to make some sense, which is really along the eastern edge of the Accord area. And if you want to find more information, there is a website, project website, that goes into a lot of these details. And we'll be updating that with the draft plan when we get there. Right now, we're trying to get stakeholders, a number of you involved, and jurisdictions to have discussions about getting it to a point where we can at least agree that this is something we want to share with the public and have discussions about. So, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Bob Gable, the Assistant Chief of the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves and the Scenic River Program Manager. It's great to be here and talk about Big Darby Creek and IPS and all things related to river and stream conservation. So, is everybody on Darby overload yet? You all getting all this? We're going to add a little bit more here to the equation, so just to make it a little bit more complicated, but we'll do our best to explain it. Let's see here. You said this wasn't working?
I think you have to press the bigger.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, also, we're going to divide this presentation in half. I'm going to give the first part, overview of the IPS, and then Heather Doherty, our Central Ohio Regional Scenic River Manager, is going to give you the second half and talk about phase 2 of the IPS and some of the work that we're being done now. So, as Anthony has mentioned, and John Tetzloff, Big and Little Darby are state and national scenic rivers. There are 17 designated state scenic rivers across the state of Ohio, capturing about 970 river miles. And the goal of our program really is to identify some of the highest quality streams in the state, designate them as wild, scenic, or recreational rivers, which is a legal designation bestowed by the Director of the Department of Natural Resources upon the resource. And then we work cooperatively with local communities to try to protect these rivers. We have very limited regulatory authority, which I won't go into today, but most of the work we get done is through education, cooperation, and outreach, much like the efforts we're talking about today. Also, I just want to mention we have the oldest program in the nation, something we're very proud of. Our legislation in the state was passed in 1968. We've been in existence for 58 years. We actually predated the National Wild Scenic Recreational Rivers Program by about 6 months. That was the legislation for that was passed later in 1968. And contrary to what you might hear, I have not been with the program the entire time. Just 33 years, though, so I've been very fortunate to be able to work in this position. Darby Creek, we've talked about that. A lot of the focus is on the Hill Branch Run, which is the eastern portion of the watershed there. We're talking about the urban threat, highest urban threat. I want to point out, though, that the Darby Watershed is still predominantly in an agricultural land use. And we hear a lot about, we're talking a lot about urbanization and development, but we also hear these comments about, well, what about agriculture? What about the ag impacts to the watershed? Well, we have to think about, all the aquatic life that Anthony and John talked about, and the historical surveys that were being done at in the lower Big Darby and the Fox Riffle decades ago. Those rare fish species were only found pretty much there in Big Darby. And Big Darby was a refugia for these rare fish species like the spotted darter and blue-breast darter, and all these rare mussels. And you have to remember that that developed with an agricultural watershed. Okay, so that all came about with agricultural land use. So that's something that could be implied for ag land use there. I'm not saying it's without impacts, but it certainly seemed to help protect some of the elements in Big Darby. And of course, Big Darby Creek is one of the most exceptional rivers in the Midwest. So the greatest threat to Darby Creek watershed is urbanization. We have several impacts associated with urbanization, most obviously just the encroachment of the riparian corridor, cutting down the forest in the floodplain, direct impacts to the stream channel, increased imperviousness, which is putting down rooftops and asphalt on the land surface. When you do that, rainwater hits those impervious surfaces, it runs off, doesn't soak into the ground, so now you've reduced your groundwater recharge. You've also created additional runoff. So this runoff is collected on the hard surfaces, taken directly to a storm drain like this, and you get more volume going to the stream faster. And along with that additional increased volume of storm water, there's a lot of non-point source pollutants in that runoff, things like hydrocarbon compounds and material from brake linings and bits of rubber. And I like to tell people, we got a lot of snow out on the ground right now. If you look at the snow in a parking lot, how dirty it is, that gives you some idea what's coming off the parking lot. You can see it when it's locked up in the ice and the snow, but you can't see it when it's in the runoff. And this photo here is this is kind of the epitome of the urban impacted stream. Riparian corridor has been removed. We have bank erosion. When you get this increased volume of stormwater hitting the stream faster, it destabilizes the channel, particularly if the riparian buffer's been removed. And then you get folks like this landowner here. Apparently somebody dumped some concrete in there to try to alleviate the bank erosion. So this is what we don't want to see happen in the Darby watershed. So we decided that we would embark on this integrated prioritization system, IPS analysis, with the Midwest Biodiversity Institute, MBI, to try to unravel some of the mysteries and really what's the questions about what's needed to protect Big Darby. So the IPS model is a model that takes all this data and analyzes it and organizes it and uses it to develop thresholds that relate to stream health. And in the Darby region in central Ohio, we can use these thresholds that are generated, stressor thresholds we call them, collectively or singularly to try to make decisions about what conservation measures are needed in the Darby watershed. So the goal of all this is to create these stressor thresholds information that local communities can use in decision-making and to advocate for them to utilize this data and base their land use planning and their local decision-making on this data and additional analyses run from this data. It's not regulatory in any way, shape, or form. So DNR, we will not have any regulatory authority whatsoever that will result from this IPS analysis. We got to go out, Heather and I, we have to go out and sell this information to the local communities. That's our next job. It's going to be a big job. As I said, a lot of data went into the analysis. So this is the study area. This is the Upper Soda River Basin. There was also some analysis in the Kokosing, Mohican, and sections of the Licking River basins. So you have over 2,000 sample sites, over 2,500 sample sites in this huge basin for biological data, fish, bugs, macroinvertebrates, water chemistry. You put all that into the mix and run the analysis, and it gives you these stressor thresholds. It kicks out those limits on different types of pollution that can help with decision making. So right now we just completed phase 1, which I've been talking about these stressor thresholds. I'll discuss those in a little more detail in just a minute. So we have that completed. We have an atlas of stressor thresholds, and we've now started phase 2 with MBI, which will help us further define some of this information and come up with some additional answers. So originally there was analysis of 300 different stressor thresholds. And what is a stressor? So a stressor is anything that can negatively impact water quality or the biological community. So it can be a land use like impervious surface, it can be a chemical pollutant, a toxin, or it can be changes to the stream habitat itself. So, this model took this huge set of data, looked at 300 potential stressors. We decided on 100 that were most significant for our purposes here. You'll see in this table, this is an example of some of the different stressor thresholds based on their categories. The ones highlighted in yellow, so we talked about the original Darby Accord and the science-based analysis was done leading into that. Those are the 3 stressors or 3 parameters that were looked at in the analysis there of the original Darby Accord. Total phosphorus nitrate, total suspended solids. Now we have a whole array of different stressor thresholds that we can look at and potentially use in additional analysis within the Darby Watershed. So these stressor thresholds are ultimately measured by their impact on stream life. So we have this Darby stream system bristling with all this different diversity and aquatic life. If we put in these stressors, at what point do we begin to impact the aquatic life? And it also includes analysis of habitat and channel disturbances and land use changes. And here you can see just some examples of good habitat, good channel. This is a stable channel on Little Darby Creek. You see the root mass there, the root wads of the trees on the bank are right at the water line, and they're providing habitat and holding the stream bank and preventing erosion. Here again, you see removal of the riparian corridor, and the stream's undoubtedly getting some additional stormwater input, and you have this accelerated bank erosion and stream channel instability. Okay, so Anthony touched on the aquatic life use designations. So the stressor thresholds ultimately were categorized for the different aquatic life use designations. So for example, we'll take impervious surface. We have a stressor threshold for the exceptional warm water habitat, aquatic life use, warm water habitat, and modified warm water habitat. So those are different degrees of stream quality, with the exceptional being the highest. Warm water is a lower quality, and modified's an impacted stream system. So we'll have different stressor thresholds that correlate with those aquatic life uses. So as the stream quality gets lower, the stressor thresholds may get higher, because at the most sensitive stream, your stressor threshold is going to be the lowest, because it's going to be the most susceptible to negative impact. And we also have stressor thresholds based on the watershed size. So we have stressor thresholds for small headwaters, wadable and boatable or larger stream systems. Those are EPA classifications based on drainage area and actually what type of fish sampling equipment they would use to sample the system. So here's, this is what we call our teaser table. This is a sample of some of the stressor thresholds that were developed as part of phase 1. Again, Big Darby targets, we're talking, outstanding, excellent. We're really talking the best of the best here. I showed that table of the 17 scenic rivers in the beginning, or the map of the 17 scenic rivers in the beginning. Those are some of the highest quality streams in the state. Darby's at the top of that list. So we're dealing with the most outstanding aquatic system here that you can get. So that puts us in these two rows here on the left side of the table, and we're talking about looking at the stressor threshold. So we take, for example, imperviousness. That's the big one everybody's interested in at the top. So basically for an EWH stream, exceptional warm water habitat stream, which is Big Darby, Little Darby, the stressor threshold is 3.6 impervious cover within the stream's watershed. So that's how that works. Now, this is based on the parameter called fractional imperviousness, which is, you may have seen studies about impacts of impervious surfaces on stream systems that talk about 9 or 10%. That's with an older a land use analysis type of system. So that actually this 3.6% is lower, but it does kind of relate to some of those higher impervious surface values that came from previous studies. So this is where we change speakers here. Heather's going to come up and finish up. We'll give you a second to look at the stressor thresholds and think about those, and we can talk about those later. So thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm Heather Doherty. I'm the Central Regional Manager for the Scenic River Program. And so the Darby is one of the rivers I work on in our central region for our program. So Bob's already highlighted this slide. And I wanted to add that there's quite a wide difference here if you can see the numbers very well. I know this is pretty small. That there's a wide range in percent impervious cover for those thresholds, from outstanding down to poor. You see a much lower range when it comes to percent agriculture, and that I think is pointing towards that being a less impactful land use on water quality. And as Bob mentioned earlier, there are many sources of problems for rivers. Agricultural land use can absolutely be very problematic. But I think these numbers, indicate, as he said, we've had heavy agricultural land use in the watershed for decades, and that is now changing. So I think this number kind of points towards that. I also wanted to quickly point out, Bob had mentioned that, and previous speakers have mentioned that we had a scientific basis for the Accord project. This is new data. This is, lots of things have changed. We have an enhanced ability to develop this kind of data that we weren't doing 20 years ago. But I wanted to add that this was a project that we initiated before the amendment revisions started. So this was not necessarily geared towards the Darby Accord. And we are also concerned about what's going on with the rest of the watershed. So I'll get to that in a minute. So these are our thresholds. And this is a graph that shows that impervious cover on the bottom by fish scores. And that's the index that the EPA uses is called the IBI, or Index of Biotic Integrity. And you can see that top line there is for exceptional warm water habitat. You would expect a score of 50 or above, and that's our kind of highest level of aquatic life in Ohio. So our goal really, if you can see that pink circle at the top, our goal is protecting the best sites that we have in the Darby. And as Anthony pointed out, and others, you know, the highest score you can get on this index is a 60, and we have a bunch of those in the Darby. And that is, our goal is to protect those. So our average IBI in the Darby is a 55, and we have many of those perfect scores. The purple line that, sorry, there's too many colors that are too similar here. I got to, maybe it's hot pink. The vertical line there is showing more or less what our impervious cover threshold is. So we're interested in protecting all those, you know, scores that are at the top. But kind of to the right of that, you see a couple data points that show streams performing well that are beyond that impervious cover threshold. So I want to point out that those are not common. It's kind of hard to see on this graph, but there's a whole bunch of data points on top of each other on the left side of that line. On the right side of the line, you see them, but they're more spread out. So this is not typical for streams to maintain that health at that level of impervious cover. So this is something that we're going to explore further in this next phase of work. What is happening at these sites? And I think it's, of course, of interest to all of us as we try to figure out how do we, you know, balance, you know, urban growth and protecting our environment. So there's a couple of things that could be going on. It's possible that these sites are on the brink of decline, and we'll have some ways to measure that in phase 2 of our project. It's possible that some really positive things could be going on at these sites. They have excellent riparian buffers, some natural resilience, and I think that's something that we think is a factor in the Darby anyway. It's one of the reasons why it is one of the highest quality rivers in the state, having to do with factors like geology. It could also be related to age. So it's possible, you know, up until 30 years ago, we weren't managing runoff from urban areas at all. So this data does reflect, you know, older sites where some of that stormwater management wasn't happening. And we are getting better at it. So it's possible that some of these sites are developing with newer management techniques and they're getting better. But it's also possible that after urbanization, the decline, it takes time to see. Some of the impacts are cumulative. For instance, with road salt, that builds up over time in soil and in our waters. So there's a lot of additional questions here to figure out, and we'll take them as far as we can in the next phase of our study. So all this data is available at our website here, ohiodnr.gov/Darby study. You'll find the full report, 200 pages. Have fun with that. We also created a technical summary that's 4 pages that I hope is more approachable for people. MBI created a beautiful data dashboard, and this is a screenshot of it here. There's a ton of information to dig into. Rather than have hundreds of pages of appendices, all of it is available online here. And this is another screenshot from that page. This is digging into habitat scores, and you can look at different metrics within habitat and for different stream sizes, tiers of aquatic life. On this website, you can also find the freshwater mussel survey report for the Hell Branch Run watershed that John talked about earlier. So we are conducting a comprehensive mussel survey of the entire watershed, kind of adjacent or parallel to this project. It's mostly done. It's going to finish up this year. There's 100 sites throughout the watershed. So that will be really important data to have that we will feed back into this analysis. So that is coming soon. So phase 2, we talked about the stressor thresholds in phase 1. Phase 2 of the project that is ongoing now will result in developing threat susceptibility and restorability rankings. So the stressor thresholds that we've already developed will be foundational to this work. And I think what we'll be able to do is look at every site, reaches, which are bigger sections of the river, and these sub-watersheds, which are known at the Huck 12 scale, and kind of layer the different stressors together. How much stress are these sites experiencing? How important are the different stressors? And not every stressor is equally important. Some are bigger magnitude than others. And this, I think, will really allow communities to, it's like, what does it mean to me where I live? This will allow communities to look a little closer and more specific. I'm getting the sign that we are running short on time, so I'm going to go quickly here. So susceptibility rankings, these are for our highest quality sites that are doing really well, and how vulnerable are they to decline? This will help guide protection. This is what this ranking will tell us. Threat rankings are for streams that are meeting standards now but have high stress loads. So how threatened are they to losing quality and no longer meeting those standards, losing sensitive species if we have additional pressure? So we'll be able to sort through which of the factors that are affecting it are most important. And then this way it's predictive, in that it tells us if we put more stress on the system, we will lose quality. And the hope here is that we're focusing action before impairment occurs. Some of us in the room who've worked on water quality for a long time, we know there's lots of money that goes into restoration, total maximum daily load modeling that helps us figure out how much of stress we need to reduce to bring rivers back into good health. The whole point here is that we're getting ahead of that. We're trying to, and I do think this is not a lot of time where we don't tend to spend as much time in this space, and we're excited to attempt that here. So restorability rankings will be for streams that are already impaired. So certainly there are tributary streams in the Darby Watershed where this is the case. And the idea is to look at the different layers of stress, again, their importance, and try to figure out which streams are most likely to bounce back and which will be most cost-effective and effective to pursue those types of projects. So additionally, there's going to be a lot of additional statistical analysis to help us figure out which are the most limiting factors, which one are correlated, how we should think about cumulative impacts. This is our kind of funding for part 1 of the project, came from ODNR. We're really thankful to the Franklin and Madison Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the Nature Conservancy for helping us kick this off. We were really thrilled to be awarded a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that we are kicking off now. That's funding phase 2 of the project. It's going to fund a staff person, additional consultant support, and the idea is to use those targets to do watershed-wide conservation planning with that data as the basis of that. It tells us what we need to achieve. So I know this is kind of where the data gets put into action, and I was guided by a colleague to say, great, we have the data, what are we going to do with it? And so if I'm a decision maker in the Darby Watershed, or or a community member, any kind of stakeholder, this is how we put it in motion. And I will say this is a new project for me, so to some extent we are all learning as we go. But I think we can think now, how does my section of the watershed compare to those stressor thresholds? So we have thresholds for different pollutants. What is existing now? In phase 2, we're going to learn more about which are most critical, and we'll have those rankings to help us figure out how threatened or vulnerable my sections are. And then with that knowledge, I think we have to put a lot of this, policy in place to employ tools to address those particular issues. So, this is something that we're excited to support with our grant work, but we know it's ongoing all the time in different jurisdictions. The amendment to the Accord is happening now. Madison County, Plain City, they're working on comprehensive plans right now. So we know the way this gets folded in on a local level will take time to evolve, but we will do the best we can to provide the tools and support for communities to put different policies in place. And we think a lot of it is going to have to do with land use planning and managing the water that is coming off our urban areas and stormwater planning. And I do think there's a lot of great things that are happening now, but I think there's room for improvement when it comes to that. So very quickly to end, when we plan for water quality, there's a lot of other great things that happen. Channel stability, as Bob was talking about. No landowner wants to lose their backyard. No jurisdiction wants to pay to have their road, bank stabilization because their road is being undermined by bank erosion. Recreational value. I was thinking about it as we were sitting there that there's a lot of, we were talking about how hard it is to protect an excellent resource close to a municipal area, a big city. Protecting a high-quality river next to a big city is very hard. And I keep thinking, people always say to me, you go to these towns in Colorado and they have this whitewater rafting feature in the middle of the city, and I've been to those towns, and you're like, wow, that's really great. This is our version of that. And if we can protect this high-quality river in our municipal, in a big city, that would be huge, and I think it means a lot for the people who work here. There's also, of course, lots of economic value there. Green space and public health, the way we build to protect water quality also supports all of those things, protecting rural character in rural areas, flood prevention, groundwater recharge. So what we're really talking about is growth that is sustainable for people as well. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Good morning. I don't know, can everybody hear me? I'm shorter than everybody else. Okay. I'm Cynthia Vermillion. I live in Hilliard, and we moved to Hilliard in 2004 from Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm going to put my resident hat on right now. I know when we moved here, we really knew nothing about the history of the Darby or anything. We just knew that we really appreciated the nature that was out there. And the kids in elementary school would have trips out to the Darby to do their creeking and things like that. And it was a very fun place to be. 2009, we had to move to a subdivision that's to the west of Cosgray, which is in the watershed. My mom was going to be moving in with us. We needed a different house to make that happen. And one of the things I noticed very quickly was how much our sump pump worked. It was dry as a bone during the first summer. My sump pump was working every single day. It was pumping water out like crazy. And I'm thinking, why the heck is it doing this? I remember contacting the city of Hilliard. Anyway, that didn't go away until they finished out our subdivision behind us. And then I can only imagine those people are feeling the brunt of the water underground. So that's when our sump pump stopped working like crazy. But it let me realize, wow, there's a lot of water here. We came from Phoenix, Arizona. We had a different water problem there. We were in the middle of a desert and we didn't have enough of it. So water is a common theme throughout the world. We have to take care of it. We have to make sure it's clean for us. So I started on Hilliard City Council at the beginning of 2020. And I know that with the history of the Accord, Hilliard was kind of slow in adopting the Accord. But I think now we certainly have a group of council people who are fully committed to protecting the Darby as much as we can. The city, since 2008, has restored over 3 miles of the Clover Groff and Hamilton stream channels. In 2023, we did pass a new standard for the Darby Watershed. The Darby Accord only requires 50% open space. We require 70% for residential development, and 50% has to be natural open space. It cannot be lawns, cannot be a golf course, or soccer field. For our commercial development, we are requiring 60%. We realize Hilliard's a very tiny percentage of the entire watershed. Many have spoken to that this morning. But in our minds that, we're still an important part of the watershed. We affect, the Hell Branch, where it's been mentioned that there weren't any mussels found. And so we feel that it is definitely our duty to do as much as we can for our little section of the watershed. As our ODNR friends have pointed out, phase 2 is being worked on right now. There are so many things as council members that we are always fretting about when we get a proposed development in the watershed. Like, what more should we be requiring to make sure that we're not harming the watershed anymore? And I firmly believe that some of these answers will lie in some of the information that we get from phase 2. No pressure, but it would be very helpful. We've asked these questions in the past years. What should we be requiring? Where should we be developing? Where should we not be developing? And I feel like these answers will come with more updated studies. So basically, that's where Hilliard is at, and thank you.
Yeah, just take a seat. While everybody's getting situated, I just want to note that I have the pleasure of working with the Darby Creek Coalition that was mentioned earlier, and we have a website called protectthedarby.org where you can go and sign up. We're going to have some educational events coming up. Yeah, let's not fall off the stage. How's that? Okay. Well, thank you all for a great conversation presentation. I have a few questions for you here today. So why don't we start off? We talked a little bit about how complex this watershed is, and it's a working watershed. So a lot of times we hear societal needs are at odds with ecological needs. We know this is not the case. So can you speak to the benefits of conservation in a healthy watershed for people? Why don't we start with Anthony down here? Oh, yeah.
Well, the first thing that we really need is good habitat along these streams, the creeks and the tributaries. If we don't have that habitat, you're not going to have a good quality as measured by Ohio EPA or anybody else. So stream restoration, establishment of a riparian corridor like Metro Parks has done for over 20 miles. Great, fantastic Metro Parks. If you haven't been there, make sure to go to Battelle Darby as your first stop if you want to get out and enjoy. But that high quality stream corridor is the most important thing to do first. We've invested several $1 million in stream restoration in the Big Darby Accord area, and that's what has made a huge difference.
Yes, there's also a benefit in protecting these areas for the recreational value. You know, the stream has great recreational value for recreational fishing and paddling and just hiking, other low-impact recreational use. The important thing with a system as high quality as Big Darby and Little Darby is that it really needs to be maintained as a natural area. So we talk about recreational use, recreational benefits. It can't be turned into kind of like what you would call a city park. You know, we can't have mowed areas along the stream with asphalt bike trails and you know, intrusions into the riparian buffer to create recreational facilities. It really needs to be managed as a huge natural area and for what we call low impact recreational use. But there's a great value in maintaining the watershed like that for the city in this urban area. Think how unique it would be to have such an outstanding natural resource, you know, just minutes away from the city of Columbus in this huge metropolitan area.
Thank you. I want to add that I think the answer there is that it's in our own best interests it's one of the reasons that Bob and I shared slides of, you know, a stream that is in good shape in terms of habitat and a stream that isn't in terms of habitat. And protecting that natural corridor is good for the biology, but it's just from an economic standpoint, it will save problems down the road when there are problems with flooding and erosion and water supply. Water supply is a big topic right now in Columbus, so we have demands for it. And the things that we're talking about also help make sure that we want the water to go into the ground. And that is where we need it to go so we can use it in the future, but it's also good for our river when we do that. So there's a lot of, I think, you know, recreation and taking your children to the stream and going fishing, there's lots of great reasons to do all those things that are economically valuable, but I think there's lots of other just straight economic reasons to do it.
Do you want us to all answer?
Yeah, sure. If you have something to add.
Lots of good things have been said. I think one of the things I always think about is how popular Hocking Hills is for people that live in Central Ohio. And that's a destination because of kind of the natural environment and what exists there. And, you know, try to imagine what we could do if we could get Darby to be that. That was actually one of the comments. Is could the Big Darby Watershed become something like Hocking Hills for some of us? But again, I'll go back to the solution we have to solve is how do we as a community afford to buy and protect that ground?
I think what I would say is it's unfortunately not really recognized how special the aquatic biology of a stream like Darby is. The eastern United States is actually a global hotspot for aquatic diversity. When it comes to freshwater mussels, the eastern United States, including Darby, is the global hotspot. There are more species in this region that we inhabit than anywhere else on Earth. So, you know, some countries have rainforests. They have great, you know, they have coral reefs. Well, in Ohio, we have these incredibly rich aquatic streams with this just amazing diversity of life. Unfortunately, most of our streams have lost a good chunk of that diversity, and we need to have that. We need to maintain that. We need to have access to it. We need to have a place where you can go out and walk in the stream and have a chance of seeing a spotted darter or a rabbit's foot mussel. That's what I would say.
So a little fact about development is once it's down, you can't come back up. So I feel like we need to be very, very careful before we develop a sensitive area, which the watershed is, And so if we can get as much current information, scientific information as we can up front, that's awesome. The other thing I wanted to address was the comment about, there's all these landowners out there, they're expecting a certain return on their investment. It's an investment. I cannot guarantee that my 401k is going to have in it what I wish it was going to have in it by the time I retire, because it's an investment, and the way the markets work, well, I'm not guaranteed anything. I think it's the same thing with real estate. When you own property, we're not owed anything. Prices go up because of the development demands. So development demands exist because people create those demands. And if we don't create them, then those prices are not going to go up as much. That's what I have to say.
So, thank you. One of the themes I think I hear through is the precautionary principle, right? That makes me think about the precautionary principle. And I wonder where else, maybe in the United States or in the world, have they undertaken strategies for achieving that balance, between ecological and societal needs? I don't know if who wants to start here?
Well, one place that comes to mind is the Chesapeake Bay, where they were losing their fisheries and losing their crabs and their oysters, and so there was an effort there to manage stormwater runoff and nutrients. That's one example. I think there's been a concerted effort in Lake Erie to try to reduce the algae blooms up there. So these things are possible.
Yeah, I agree. There's been some efforts in the Chicago area as well. But, I mean, there really aren't a lot of examples because this is really hard, as we're all sitting here. So I think that's one of the issues. Is it's very challenging. It takes resources. You're going to hear me say this over and over again. It takes resources. So how do we find the resources to do that?
If anybody has anything they want to add?
What's that?
If you want to add anything.
Yeah, so I think, the IPS has been run by MBI in a couple other situations, Chicago area, down the Cincinnati area. But really, this is the first time, to my knowledge, that an IPS, this level of analysis, has been run with the focus on an outstanding water resource ecosystem like the Darby Watershed. So I really feel like the work we're doing here is, kind of groundbreaking, and that we have an opportunity to get as much data and information as we can. And I'm not saying it's going to provide all the answers necessarily, but the more data and the more information we have to use and utilize an additional analysis, I think it can bring us closer to finding, the best ways to protect this outstanding resource.
A couple of examples I know of. One was down in the metro Atlanta area in Georgia. The Etowah River watershed has rare fish in it. That, about 20 years ago or so, was proposed as a conservation plan to protect the fish in the watershed. That fell apart because of fighting between the counties that are in the metro Atlanta area. The other area that might be more successful is in Lake Tahoe and Nevada-California border, where they are trying to maintain the clarity of the water in the lake. And so they have a development effort that is pretty stringent to protect nutrient runoff and stormwater in the Lake Tahoe basin.
So something that strikes me, I don't know if anybody has anything else to add to that. Okay. Something that strikes me is some of the things I heard was really around collaboration, right? Like we're groundbreaking, but it's really going to require some collaboration. So I'd love for you to speak, all of you if you would, to what collaboration has looked like in this current process and how it will continue to guide the completion of the revised accord.
I think, collaboration is key. And the great news is even as we're talking about this amendment, all the parties that we're talking to believe in the accord and believe in wanting it to be successful. And so I think that speaks to all the effort that went into creating it, all the education, understanding about the importance of the watershed, everyone's at the table saying, yeah, we got to figure out how to make this work and improve it. So as we talk about this amendment, I think the headline is everybody wants this to be successful. So as long as we're keeping that in mind, then it's, all right, what are the details? How do we make it possible?
Sorry, John. I guess I will add that that all the different players here have different strengths to bring to the process, and so I'm really thankful that we have John and Anthony, who have so much knowledge and scientific knowledge of the watershed and the institutional knowledge that I was not working in the Darby watershed when the first round came through. So I think that's really important. We've worked together on educational components before, which is, very important. If we want decision making, it has to be based on, good information and direct experience with the watershed. And certainly, people like Cynthia have to deal with the reality of what it means when we put these policies in place, and that is not my day today. So we can learn from each other, I think, which is really important. We all bring different, play different roles in the work.
And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to sell these concepts, the stressor thresholds, and some of the information generated from the IPS, as well as, good land use planning and development principles. We're going to have to sell that throughout the entire watershed. I know we've been focused on the Accord planning area here, which is just western Franklin County. Heather and I are going to have to take this to Union, Madison, Pickaway counties, the more rural areas of the watershed. You have some slightly different challenges in those areas. You might have different mindsets, different goals for local development. So, talking about collaboration, we're going to have to build a very large collaborative effort throughout the entire watershed to be successful. And that's going to be quite a challenge. So we've got our work cut out for us.
Well, collaboration is key. And despite Chris's Herculean efforts to bring everybody to the table and get everybody talking, I think it's been a rough go this time around. He has, he has a different role. I'm free to speak my mind, I guess, a little bit more, so why not speak it? I think this go around, Columbus has had a pretty heavy hand. I think they've come into it with a view of what they wanted, which was more development, and I think we're in a process now of trying to get them to come to the table. Some of the jurisdictions wrote a letter to Columbus and said, "Oh, wait, we're not ready for this. We're just seeing this for the first time. We want to talk more about this. We have some concerns." And Columbus wrote back and said, I'm not going to say they said pound sand, but they said, we don't want to pause. We think we can continue to talk, but we're moving forward. We want something by March, or now April. So collaboration is key. I don't want to be collecting signatures later this year to try to stop something that Columbus is adamant about pushing forward. But I remain hopeful. This panned out last time. Columbus came around and became a big advocate for the creek, and I think it's in their political interests to take that leadership role again, and I'm hopeful that they will. And I'm hopeful that they realize that their citizens probably expect that of them.
I know my council colleagues and I rely heavily on the knowledge that everybody else here brings, because I know when I started, I knew very little about the Darby Creek watershed. So that's
very key for us. I appreciate the workshops that were held in 2025 where people were able to go and give input. And now we're at a phase where I firmly believe that truly listening and talking to each other is key right now with all of the parties. We've got to listen and respect each other's views and our concerns.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? Okay, great. I've been hoping that I can ask this question. So, looking back over the past 20 years, there were clear signs the Accord was not working as intended. What are the indicators of success or failure of the Accord, and how do we know whether the revised Accord will achieve the vision and goals? And I don't know who wants to start with that big, heavy question, but I think you're being pointed at, Chris.
Lots to answer this, but the water quality monitoring, I think, is critical because everything we keep talking about, trying to prove or disprove, I think begins and ends with water quality monitoring. And the IPS is great because it's providing us this comprehensive list of stressors, and to be able to look at those stressors in action across time in the same locations, I think is critically important, and not just for the Franklin County portion of the watershed, but for what's happening everywhere else. And I guess the one other thing to add, I think it's critically to understand that development today follows sanitary sewer. So where sewer is connected, development is going to happen. And it happens not just because it needs to have sewer to happen, it happens because the staggering costs of building sanitary sewer means you've got to have development to pay for it. And so if you're watching where development's going to happen, just watch where the sanitary sewer goes. And what that really means is we need to be thinking about, and I think what Columbus is willing to put on the table as part of this process is saying sanitary sewer lines will run in these locations and not these locations. And by doing that, you're saying development's going to happen in those locations where sanitary sewers run and not in locations where it's not run, other than smaller lot splits, which is going to be the purview of the townships and the other communities. But one of the big issues we're not talking about is because of the preservation efforts in some sense in Franklin County and the Accord, development is now hopping over it. And Anthony showed the picture of the development right in Plain City, right along the Darby. So now we've got Union County development happening. Now we've got Madison County happening. We've got a new sewer line proposed to connect all the way through along the eastern edge of Madison County. Again, they're using that for economic development. It's better to have sanitary sewer than to have septic systems. But what that means is development is going to follow that. It has to. It's the only way the economics work. And so we need to be talking about this area. We also need to be talking about the rest of the watershed.
Yeah, so success with whether it's the old Accord or the amendments really is, it all comes down to biological performance. Biological performance of the stream system tells everything, tells all. So, you know, we have Big and Little Darby, the Hell Branch, the tributaries that is performing at a certain level now. You know, as the development occurs, will they continue to perform at that level? Will they continue to have the rare and endangered species, the sensitive species like the spotted darter? You know, that will ultimately tell the story. Right now, well, one thing we've asked for, DNR, as part of this process, is that basically all the sites that were monitored by Ohio EPA throughout the Accord planning area in Big Darby and the tributaries be monitored again for the fish, macroinvertebrates, water chemistry, so that we can see how the stream is performing now and we get a baseline of that biological data before any additional development occurs. And that way, if that biology does change, that water quality does change, we'll be able to sense it quickly. And Chris mentioned, you know, monitoring as the development occurs downstream of the new developments. That's great. That'll help. But we really need to know where the system is at right now, how it's performing, before we go ahead further. Mussels are the other concern. You know, we're conducting this systemic-wide mussel survey now. We suspect that we're going to see some, you know, those numbers slipping in mussel populations and diversity throughout the watershed. We're not sure what's causing that, so that's a concern. and something else that we need to try to figure out as part of this whole equation.
One measure of success is that this still exists after more than 20 years of discussions. I think John understated the level of animosity in the early meetings. Okay, it was bad. No matter how bad it is in the future, it's probably not going to be as bad as it was back then. So that's one thing that's good. We still have it. No one's gone out on their own. Hopefully that won't happen. Bad things or challenges are that you got to maintain momentum. To maintain momentum on something like Lake Erie, Ohio State has decades of experience in Lake Erie. You've got to maintain that to make progress or improvements. Same with Big Darby Creek. It's been going for over 50 years. We got to maintain. In the last decade, we have not maintained the level of effort that we needed to, whether it's in land acquisition or staff or investment. So those are two different ways to look at it. So we've had some water quality monitoring. It's good that we'll have more in the future. We need to look at that when we get it and understand what that monitoring says. We need to understand what the IPS says. We need to use the IPS. That will help us achieve success. If we don't use that adequately, somebody mentioned the precautionary principle. If we don't use that, we're not going to succeed. So those are the things we need for success in the next decade.
I think Cynthia would like to, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to add, I think going forward, the other thing we need to remember is there's plenty of places in our existing boundaries that can be infilled, redeveloped, and they're already on sewer and water, and we need to always look at those places as well instead of constantly expanding outward.
Okay.
You triggered. So I think one of the things that's been really interesting in thinking about this Accord amendment, thinking about the IPS, we keep talking about in the Accord new development. But the reality is, I think we're going to find when we start really looking at some of this IPS is that old development has been a big problem. And we're not talking about how to go back and correct old development. And again, that's going to have a price tag and take an effort, but thinking about what kind of mechanisms we can do to take care of the older development. The state has this brownfield program where there's state money to go out and fix things that were contaminating. I mean, thinking about something along those lines in the Darby as a test model to figure out how we take care of the things that were done before any of these conversations that have had negative impact is something we haven't been thinking about but probably should.
May I add to that? There is this grant program. There's also EPA grant funding to go do retrofits on green infrastructure that requires staffing. And I think the resources to get the people power to do the work, I think we've talked about that before, but I'd like to underscore that. It takes people to make that happen.
Great. So,
One sign of success, I think, will be when developers come forward with plans. If staff in the jurisdictions are starting to question them about, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do this? Have you done this? Instead of figuring out ways to get around the rules, cut corners here, allow a variance here. That's been the pattern in the past. To me, I want to see the jurisdictions train their staff up to understand the plan and really make sure that it's happening on a site-by-site basis.
so open it up. Okay.
You can all head down. Oh my. Let's see if it wakes up. Okay. I can go ahead and get started. All right, everybody. Let's go ahead and give all of our speakers a huge round of applause. They all made the choice to go out of their way and not do the simple thing, which would be to not speak at this program. This, compared to most EPN programs that we host, is complex, both because it's time sensitive, there are plenty of different values, and ecologically and socially, it's extremely complex. So I couldn't thank all of our speakers more for doing the hard thing, going out of their way and coming here to this program, going out on a limb to speak to all of you today, all on live stream. Thank you, seriously, that was amazing. And thank you to Kristy Meyer, our moderator. Weaving together all these topics is not easy to do, and you're excellent at bringing us together from different disciplines. So thank you, Kristy. And as a token of our appreciation, my colleague Hallie Stelzl is handing out certificates to thank all of our speakers for their time and expertise shared today. Okay, so while I'm here, I want to tell you a little bit about what we have planned next with EPN. On March 10th, we'll meet right back here for a conversation about flood risk in rural communities throughout Ohio. This is a partnership that we have annually with the Water Management Association of Ohio, and we'll be exploring best practices for communities to grapple with heightened risk of floods. Then on Earth Day, on April 22nd, we'll meet across the street at the Fawcett Center, and that's the time that we'll be exploring local coalitions for climate action. You might have read climate action plans in whatever city you're from in Ohio. Today, or on Earth Day, in about 2 months, we're going to talk about how those plans have been able to capture new segments of the community who can be action takers and actually implement the recommendations that are part of those plans. That event is free. You can sign up right now on our website, epn.osu.edu. Okay, fun, quick announcement. You might have heard that the EPN is currently working to develop what we're calling EPN Connect. EPN Connect is exactly what you see here on the slide. It's our chance to find one simple way to connect environmental professionals based off of expertise, topic, interest area, really everything that might matter when you're making the decision about who you want to work with for any given project, or maybe someone to come bring into your classroom if you're a teacher. EPN Connect will have information for all of that. So I'm going to show you a quick video just so you can get a sense of what to expect on EPN Connect. This is the first time we've ever showed what the profiles will look like. So you're getting a treat today, I think. On anyone's profile, you're able to identify the topics that you work within, as well as the specific projects that you do within those topics. This is all fake data from a profile that I made, but you can imagine it'd be much more complex for your own profile. The cool thing is that all this is actually searchable. So when you go to the directory, you can go in, choose a topic that you're interested in. Only a couple of organizations are here right now, but there are going to be over 700 throughout all of Ohio who are part of this tool that we've already identified. So you can search by them. You can add in like an alumni status tag, or if someone's part of a coalition, you can search for that. And then all of a sudden, the people that match those criteria that you selected are going to pop up. You can click on their profiles, find their email, and reach out to them. And the cool thing is, you know that they want to be connected with you because they've already taken the time to make a profile. And we hope that you all will do the same thing. Of course, you can also go and check out information about resources that people posted. You can also find information about events and jobs and opportunities. But in the interest of time, I do want to go ahead and skip over so we can get on to our networking session. But don't just take it from me. Take it from people who we've been workshopping this tool with. In fact, we've had conversations with dozens of leaders in the environmental community, not just here in Franklin County, but all across the state. We've been on the road. We've been having plenty of Zoom calls. And you can see from the quotes here from an environmental professional, a student at Ohio Wesleyan University, and a teacher at CCS here in Columbus, the different ways that they plan to use EPN Connect to further their own bottom line. Imagine a teacher, they only have so much time in the day to be able to know who the expert is local to them, who might be interested in speaking to their students about some environmental topic. Now it's possible with EPN Connect. So some dates that you might want to know. We're going to open up the account portal for this website, hopefully late February, but no matter what, on Earth Day, everything is going to go live. So that same free Earth Day event at the Fawcett Center, we hope that you'll join us there to talk about local climate action, but also to get the first glimpse at the final version of EPN Connect. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass it over to Mike McNutt, who's sitting here at one of the front tables. He's an alumni of SCNR. He's a strategic and crisis communicator expert, and he's planned a very fun networking session for you all today. So if you're in the back of the room, I encourage you to come closer to the front, find a spot at a table up here, and Mike's got plenty of activities ready for us to go with. If you are planning on heading out, please drop off your coffee mug on one of the tables in the back. We'll collect it later. And we'll look forward to seeing you at a future EPM program. So thank you.
All right.